I don't, oh, there, now we're on, okay. I will call the meeting to order, please. Doug, will you call the roll, please?
Good morning, Madam Chair. Thank you. Commissioner Alvarado.
Yes, sir.
Commissioner Burke. Commissioner Burke. Commissioner Butler.
Present.
Commissioner Dunn.
Present.
Commissioner Gilmetti.
Present.
Commissioner Gordino.
Present.
Commissioner Kehoe.
Here.
Commissioner Norton.
Present.
Commissioner Tavaloni.
Here.
Commissioner Van Konijnenburg.
Here.
Chair Inman.
Here.
Senator Bell.
Here.
Assemblymember Frazier. Madam Chair, we have a quorum.
Okay, well, first of all, I just want to say welcome to our two new commissioners, Hillary Norton and Tamika Butler. It's wonderful to have our dais full again. And then I believe each of them just wants to make a statement for today.
We are delighted to be here at our very first meeting as commission appointees from Governor Newsom. Because we have not filled out our Form 700 in the abundance of caution, every vote today will be recorded for me as abstention. And I will be recusing myself fully from item 50.
Okay. Tamika.
Good morning, everybody. Good? Better. Good morning, everybody. I'm also happy to be here, and I like brevity, so I will say ditto on abstaining in an abundance of caution. Thank you.
Thank you. Doug, will you please do a safety announcement for us? We are in a basement.
Madam Chair, yes, I will. Ladies and gentlemen, if there's any type of emergency, exits are at the back of the room, also on the side of the room. Make your way to the ground floor, out the front of the building, and across to the park. That would be the meeting point, the gathering point for a safety emergency. If you have any other type of emergency, we will dial 911. Just let myself or someone on our staff know, and we'll take care of that right away.
Thank you. All right, we'll move to item number 2. Welcome to the region, and we have Mayor Jeremy Young.
Thank you very much. I'd like to welcome the CTC to Stanislaus County, and particularly Modesto. We're happy to have you here. I know it's a little bit chaotic to change meetings all the time, but for us it's very important. It allows our community to engage more fully, and I certainly appreciate that. Now, on behalf of StanCog, I'm fortunate enough to represent them as a chair, and I'm supported by wonderful policy board members who are very engaged and educated. And I think the best staff that I could ever ask for, so I really would like to recognize them as well. I wanted to thank our taxpayers, too, in Stanislaus County, because in 2016, we passed Measure L, which makes us a self-help county. And because of that, we've been able to really do a lot of the deferred maintenance that had gone undone for a long time. And as you know, with that, we're able to match some funds with the state in order to connect the regional transportation that's so important to us. You'll see a short video here in a few minutes, a very short video, and it will feature Highway 132, which is a great project for us. We want to thank the state and the CTC for supporting that. We received $21 million in build grants, or correction, for grants in order to make that happen. So that was very important. And the other one that you'll see featured on the video is the North County Corridor, which is another regional project that's very important. So with that, I'll start the video. Thank you very much, and welcome once again. If there's anything that we can do to make your stay more comfortable here in Modesto, please let us know.
Well, thank you. You're moving so fast. We're all getting dizzy here. That's perfect. We love seeing projects go that quickly. So, anyway, okay, we're going to move on to item number 3, approval of minutes.
Move it.
Second.
Have a motion by Commissioner Alvarado, a second by Commissioner Kehoe. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, I'll call for the vote. All in favor? Aye. Anybody opposed? Anybody abstaining? Yes. Those are automatic. Motion carries. Item 4, Commissioner meeting for compensation. Second. We have a motion by Commissioner Gometti, a second by Commissioner Tavalloni. Is there discussion? Hearing none, all in favor? Aye. Anybody opposed? Anybody abstain? That motion carries. Item 5, Commissioner Executive Director Brownson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Chair. Commissioners, I wanted to take the opportunity also on behalf of staff to welcome Commissioners Butler and Norton to the Commission. We're looking forward to working with both of you. And I also wanted to take the opportunity to express my appreciation for the time that I've had to work with Acting Director Bob Franzoya. Bob, I've really appreciated the opportunity to work with you, and just want to thank you for everything. So Commissioners, today I just had a few updates on current events. On Monday, September 30th, just to make sure everyone's aware, there was a transit workshop that was held in Sacramento to discuss the unique aspects of delivering transit projects. And I wanted to thank especially Teresa Favila of our staff for the work that she put into that workshop. It was very well received. We had a lot of attendance. I also wanted to thank Philip Chu from San Bernardino County Transportation Authority. He was instrumental in securing the RTPA and the Federal Transit Administration presenters. So Philip, thank you. And also our presenters I wanted to thank. We had Don Fatis from San Diego Association of Governments, Patricia Chen from LA Metro, Marcella Ressi from Santa Clara Valley Transportation Authority, Bernardo Bustamante from the Federal Transit Administration, Region 9, as well as Kyle Gradinger from Caltrans. So just wanted to really thank you, the speakers, for dedicating their time in preparing for the workshop and providing information for all of us. The Commission also held or participated in a Tri-State Commission meeting on September 16th and 17th in Stevenson, Washington. It was a very informative Tri-State meeting, and the 3 states will continue to work together. And again, I would like to thank Garth Hopkins and Doug Remedios for their work in that, and making sure that it was a positive experience and very good information provided. The Commission is required by statute to hold hearings on the Caltrans proposed Interregional Transportation Improvement Program. Yesterday was the Northern hearing. It was held here in this room, and next October 15th, next Tuesday, the next ITIP hearing will be held in Southern California at the Transportation Corridor Agency's facility. The Commission is holding a joint meeting tomorrow with the California Air Resources Board. That meeting will be held at the Doubletree in Modesto. It will begin at 8:30 a.m. We're hoping that all of you can attend that meeting. Also wanted to make everyone aware that on October 28th, we will be participating in a dedication ceremony for the Bimla Reinhardt Pier at San Francisco Oakland Bay Bridge. It will be on Yerba Buena Island, and this is a true honor and privilege to be able to attend this important event to recognize and dedicate a pier after our former executive director and someone that we all loved. So hopefully, you'll all consider attending as well. We hope to see you all there. We also have an ATP Policy Symposium coming up on October 29th and 30th, on Tuesday and Wednesday in Sacramento. We have a tremendous amount of very expert presenters that will be sharing information about active transportation that will be used by the Commission staff to formulate improvements to that program moving forward to bring to you, Commissioners, for your consideration. There's a town hall meeting in Del Norte County on Wednesday, November 6th, and we are tentatively holding a Save the Date workshop for the SAFE rule, and we will provide you more information as we gather information on whether or not we will hold that workshop. So we'll just keep checking our website, and we'll continue communicating with all of you through the listserv. Also wanted to thank two of our staff members, Alicia Sakira and Alika Shingazi, for their work on the local streets and roads expenditure reporting. It's all the cities and counties are required by law to submit their reports by a certain date, and our staff called a number of local governments, and I'm pleased to report to you that we have 100% compliance. And yes, and it's so all the local partners and our staff working together, and I just really want to thank our staff and all the local agencies out there that provided the expenditure reports. We have a few staffing updates. Wanted to let you know that we have promoted Alika Shingazi. She has been working on the Local Streets and Roads program. She was promoted to an Associate Governmental Program Analyst, and she will be transitioning from the Local Streets and Roads program to work with Lori on the Active Transportation program. Is Alika here? She's not here today. We also hired a Hannah Walter, and I don't see Hannah here today. She'll be here later, so we'll have you meet her. She was hired last month to lead the road charge. She's our road charge program manager. Her background is in finance, policy, and program management. She previously served as the executive policy advisor at the Department of Water Resources, and we're pleased to have her on our team. Also, we're happy for Joe Phil Borja, but it's a loss for us when I let you know that Joe Phil Borja did take a promotional opportunity. He's now working with the Sacramento Regional Transit District, and I was hoping Joe Phil might be here, but you may see him a little later. We also hired Kevin Dillon. He's a graduate of CSU Sacramento. He has a business degree. He has worked in Caltrans Division of Engineering Services since 2012, and so he will be working on programming, overseeing our transit programs. So with that, Commissioners, that concludes the remarks I wanted to make, but this is an action item. There are certain changes or updates to the 2020 meeting schedule that I'm seeking your approval of today. The changes that we're making, or the updates, would be to add the dates for the shop hearings, as well as the April 29th joint CTC CARB meeting. On that note, I want to let you know that legislation was passed, and in 2020, we will also be meeting with the California State Housing and Community Development. And so this date may change, but for now, if we'd like to update the calendar. We also want to designate the town hall meeting in the fall of 2020 to be held in Lake Tahoe. And then with that, Commissioners, I'm seeking your approval of these updates to the 2020 meeting calendar.
We have a motion by Commissioner Van Konynenberg, a second by Commissioner Gometti. Oh, it was Commissioner Tavaloni, sorry. Any discussion on that? Hearing none, I'll call for the vote. All in favor? Aye. Anybody opposed? Motion carries. Okay. Commissioner reports. Fellow commissioners? Yes, Commissioner Dunn.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a note as a founding member of Mobility 21 to thank my colleagues for joining in the Mobility 21 conference this year. Most of you know that I think if it isn't the largest transportation mobility conference in the United States, it's certainly the largest in the Western United States. Record attendance, great content, and again, thank Secretary Kim for being there as well. I really appreciate the gathering of the great minds to tackle the toughest issues. So thank you for participating.
Okay, and so Commissioner Dunn and I had dueling breakout sessions, and I counted we had more in the freight section.
No, sorry. Net zero, girlfriend.
No, I too participated and want to thank everybody. Other commissioner reports? Okay, hearing none, we will move on. Secretary Kim, David.
Thank you very much. Oh, here we go. Thank you very much, Madam Chair and Commissioners. It's great to see all of you. The last time we got together was a couple months ago in San Jose, and a few things have transpired since then. So what I'd like to do this morning is make a few comments regarding the Governor's executive order on climate change, which was issued on September 20th, just a couple weeks ago. And as we all know, this has been the subject of much discussion within transportation circles, and I think it's really important to set the record straight on a number of fronts. First, let's start with the basics. An executive order does not supersede existing state law. I think we all know that SB 1 funds are constitutionally protected under Article 19, and an executive order does not change that fact. Second, I want to make clear to everybody that we are going to continue the fix-it-first approach outlined in SB 1. Maintaining the condition of our highways, roads, and bridges is of the utmost importance to Governor Newsom, and I want to assure you this effort will continue to move forward. But having said that, let's also recognize a couple things. First, we are legally required to meet climate goals under AB 32 and SB 32. I think we all know the factoid. The transportation sector is responsible for 40% of greenhouse gas emissions. And so it is incumbent upon all of us in transportation to be a part of the solution and to do everything we can to reduce the share of GHG emissions that come from the transportation sector. I think it's vital for everyone to understand that we are mandated and obligated to go in this direction. And setting aside statutory requirements for a moment, we can all agree that tackling climate change is the right thing to do. So, we've come to a point where it is time for all of us in the transportation world to have a different kind of conversation. We need to rethink how transportation planning and investments are executed and what the desired outcomes ought to be. And I want to make clear that the Governor's executive order is just the beginning of that conversation, not the end. We're going to approach this in a way that makes sense from the standpoint of the economy, jobs, and income inequality. We also have a fiscal responsibility to spend our transportation dollars wisely. That means directing available resources to projects that make the most progress towards meeting climate goals. We're also going to be pragmatic and collaborative in terms of how we get there. And so to that end, the administration will be developing an implementation plan, and we want your input. It is vitally important to us to have the public involved in this conversation. And so, Madam Chair, I wanted to convey these points as a way of setting the stage for tomorrow's meeting when the Commission will receive a more detailed presentation on the executive order. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Do we have questions for Secretary Kim? Secretary, I have a question regarding to the announcement of the 800,000 resident blackout because of fire warning today, and I don't know if you want to address that or if Bob wants to address it.
I believe Bob would be prepared to address that in his report.
Great, because I worried when I heard that about transportation impacts as well. So, okay, we will move on. If we have no other items, we'll move on now to Bob, Caltrans.
Caltrans looking forward to working with you. I'd also like to take a personal note to say welcome to Commissioner Kehoe. Chris had a conflict at the last meeting and was unable to attend. I just want to say that I had the great fortune of being staff director for Senate Appropriations during her tenure as chair. And I want to say it was one of the most effective and respected and senatorial chairs our committee had ever experienced. Thank you, Chris.
Thank you, Bob. I'm sorry, I was talking to the other commissioners, and I didn't even realize you were over there till I looked up. And every word you said about me, except for being in elected office, I would say about you. You're a consummate professional and a public servant. Thanks for everything you do.
Thank you. I have quite a few personnel changes to share with you. Grant, I do have an update. I will get to that. In fact, let me do that first, perhaps more important. All district have reported in with a call this morning to our Caltrans Department Operations Center. All districts, excuse me, are coordinating with CHP and local law enforcement. All districts have activated their emergency operations centers to level 3. Updates in all districts are being prepared. Excuse me. All districts are preparing traffic management plans. Districts are deploying a combination of battery and generation backup on identified key intersections, and fuel contingency plans are in place. Motorists will see no impacts to backup flashing for 24 to 48 hours to no signs. There will be some dark intersections. CMS signboards are being deployed. We have a variety, as you can imagine, of impacts. The Bay Area has 4,000 signals. Workers are being deployed in urban areas. We are moving to the rural areas where we are going to have greater challenges in fully managing the system. Of key interest, the Caldecott Tunnel will be open. There is a 9 a.m. test in 3 minutes of the system. District 4 has been working extremely closely and effectively with PG&E. 4 generators, 3 for operations and 1 for backup, were brought in last night starting around 10 p.m. And we hope to have if all goes well, at 10 a.m. the generation will be operational, and the tunnels will be open and operational for any power shutdowns. We are anticipating the Devil's Slide, the Tom Lantos tunnels, will not be impacted. PG&E has been able to, through 2 substations, Pacific and Half Moon Bay, able to route power through the Pacifica substation, keeping the fans open on that tunnel. If wind events get higher, we may have some additional challenges there. District 4 is going to be doing a press conference at 10:30 a.m. to inform the public on the status of the impacts on Caldecott. But we're feeling very confident now that we will have no traffic impacts for the passage of those tunnels. I have a bunch of really great experts. So If the commission would like to have additional direct information, I think I have a number of tremendously experienced district directors who I've had the pleasure of working with. I know Amarjeet has just stepped up here. If you'd like to direct any questions on specific operational questions to them, I'd be happy to have them speak to the commission.
Do we have any other questions? Yes, Commissioner Gometti.
Bob, what kind of traffic impacts did the Bay Area suffer this morning?
I don't know that I could say anything specific, Jim. The Bay Area, my understanding, was in a phase 2 shutdown, so the power was not to be off until approximately noon, was my understanding as of late last evening. I know that shutdowns were occurring earlier north of the Bay Area. I will find out as soon as possible, but we are hopeful that there are no impacts for Caldecott or Devil Slide.
So it was open this morning?
It was open this morning. The shutdown was not intended to occur for that area until noon, so-called phase 2. So by having the generators operational at 10, we hopefully beat that by 2 hours.
Great, thank you.
Yes, Commissioner Kehoe.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Bob, do we have any indication from PG&E how long this state is going to go on, the power shutdown?
Generally, I think we're hoping that the winds don't accelerate. As the winds do accelerate and continue, the impacts could increase. We did have a report, I have not confirmed it, that apparently some areas have re-energized. I heard that this morning regarding possibly Oroville and Paradise. So I don't know if there are local
We know.
the power's
back on.
The power's coming on in some place in Oroville and Paradise, Chris. I will find out if we have an update. We'll get an update to you as soon as we can.
Thank you. Thanks.
Yes, Commissioner Dunn.
Thanks, Bob. I'm curious on how the whole operations are going to be running, because Southern California Edison is talking about the same thing in Southern California. Are people being advised to stay home, not go to work? I mean, someone described this as like having an earthquake, but without the destruction of buildings happening. What is the protocol besides just transportation? Because you're connected obviously to the whole Northern California economy.
We are providing as much information as possible to the Office of Emergency Services, because there are other impacts, for example, to maybe questions about BART,
Right.
Which we understand has backup power, but there are other impacts on the transportation system. I don't have a specific answer for you, Commissioner. I will get one as soon as possible and see what our statewide message is. But we do understand that it's impacting Southern California Edison as well.
Right, thanks.
Any other comments from commissioners? Thank you. Bob, my question is, what about all our other partners? How do you connect? Because in the mobility world, it's not just our state, but our local LA Metro. Are those coordinated with you all, or how does that work?
Commissioner, what I'd like to do, instead of saying I don't know and get back to you, can I invite one or two of our directors
Certainly.
up who would, can I get a couple of Amarjeet and perhaps somebody else somebody familiar with our traffic management system?
Mike or John?
Yeah. John, absolutely, that'd be great. If you could speak to the commissioner's questions.
Such a gentleman.
Thank you, John, for yielding, I guess, to the north. Good morning, Commissioners. Amarjeet Benipal, District 3 Director. As our Director indicated, we just had a teleconference with all of the northerly districts trying to go through the assessment. In District 3, we have actually, through our strategic planning, knowing this event was coming, we have actually 85 signals which are critical from traffic safety perspective. So when we coordinate through our EOC, we actually not only coordinate our systems, we actually coordinate with our local partners and engage CHP and law enforcement. CHP is the lead with actually our sheriff department trying to make sure the law enforcement component goes on. But on our end, when we are coordinating, we're actually working with our RT partners or our public works sector at the same time.
Okay, because I remember with our debriefing from the campfire, that there was challenge getting people off the mountain, and the Chico coordination, we were backing up. So
some of those unfortunate events did give us a little more running start than what we need to expect this time. So we actually had for a couple of days planning for it, and resources has been deployed to the appropriate strategic location to actually respond immediately. And our staff actually been charging most of the signals starting at 12 a.m. this morning, cutting the power over to the generation power. And as Bob indicated, Caltrans is the main event which we are actually working through. So right now, Tony's team should be actually working with the PG&E and trying to do the cutover by 10 a.m. We should know how the systems are. And then at 10:30, we should be able to walk everyone through that we actually have systems in place.
Great. Do we have any other questions? Just for the record, we had, I guess, John, you're not off the hook yet, but at our tri-state hearing or meeting that we held in Washington, we had Mayor Jody Jones tell us, what she'd do differently, and it's kind of what's old is new, and she wants a siren because the cell phone towers don't work and everything. So I think for all of us, we need to really think about what would that cost in some of these areas and that's more in the prevention. But thank you. Yes, John Belinsky, you want to tell us about SoCal?
Good morning, Chair and Commissioners. I thought I was off the hook. I thought Amarjeet could have taken care of all of it. So we have reached out to all of our local partners, and we have done this prior to this event because of some of the events that have taken place in the past, in coordinating how we're going to manage traffic signals in particular. And for example, in Malibu, we've been working with that city to allow them to have access to our facilities. When a power outage does occur, they have taken it upon themselves to purchase generators in the event this takes place, to allow them to manage those and provide power in strategic locations. Also, we have battery backup systems that exist, that are available, that can power those for a period of time. But obviously, if it's extended, they will go dark. We're providing messages to the public that when they see a dark signal, treat it as a stop sign, a four-way stop.
Great. Okay. Well, we'll appreciate all the support you all have given us, and I think thank you to all the men and women in the transportation world, because we know that they're often the unsung heroes in all of this. So thank you. Thank you, Bob. You want to go back to your report?
Yes, if I could, also, just for information, we track our signals by fire risk by high, medium, and low. Traffic signals, obviously, with a high fire risk have the greatest probability of being impacted. High is when a traffic signal is inside either a Tier 2 or Tier 3 PUC fire threat zone. Medium is when a traffic signal is within a half-mile buffer of Tier 2 or 3, and low is when a traffic signal is more than a half a mile away from any PUC threat fire zone. So the districts by county know how many high, medium, low traffic signals they are working to monitor. I have quite a few personnel changes to share with you. As you likely know, a new Caltrans director has been appointed by Governor Newsom, and Tokes Omishakin will start October 23rd. Director Omishakin is from Nashville, Tennessee, and was Deputy Commissioner for Environmental and Planning at the Tennessee Department of Transportation. At the Tennessee Transportation Department, he successfully established environmental, multimodal, and planning policies necessary to make the Tennessee Department of Transportation one of the best state DOTs in the country. Prior to that, he served as Director of Healthy Living Initiatives in the Nashville Mayor's Office. In 2017, he was named Vice Chairman of AASHTO's Active Transportation Council and also served as Chair of its Multimodal Task Force. Director Omishakin earned a master's degree in Urban and Regional Planning from Jackson State University. And you'll be happy to know that Jim Davis has been appointed by Governor Newsom as Chief Deputy Director. Jim is currently at the AASHTO conference in St. Louis. Chief Deputy Director Davis has been a special advisor to the director at Caltrans since the beginning of the year. He held multiple positions at Caltrans, including Senate Bill 1 Program Manager, Acting District 4 Director, Division Chiefs of Project Management, Transportation Planning and Engineering Services. He has held multiple transportation engineering positions. We also filled the Division Chief of Engineering Services, Tom Ostrom, who has had multiple management positions at Caltrans, including State Bridge Engineer and Chief of Earthquake Engineering, Analysis and Research, has been appointed to that position. We had a couple of retirements in the last month at our executive level. Carla Sutliff, Deputy Director of Project Planning for the last 7 years, and Coco Briseño, Deputy Director of Planning and Modal Programs, both retired at the end of August and early September. We are, of course, very happy for both, but they will be missed. In the interim, Corey Binns, District 11 Director, has been appointed Acting Deputy Director for Project Delivery and Chief Engineer, and Dave Moore, District Director 2, has been appointed Acting Deputy Director for Planning and Modal Programs. Acting for the District 11 Director is Gustavo Gallardo, who has served as Chief Deputy Director in District 11 for the past year. And Donna Berry has been appointed Acting District 11 Chief Deputy Director during Gustavo's term. In District 2, Jeannie Ward-Waller, Caltrans Sustainability Program Manager, has been appointed as Acting District Director 2. There's a lot of changes. I congratulate everyone that's taken on new roles, whether in retirement or new career positions, and I look forward to working with all of them. Secretary Kim mentioned the executive order, and I'm going to let those comments stand as completely appropriate and supported by Caltrans. We look forward to working with the administration and implementation of the executive order. Finally, this is my last CTC meeting. I want to thank Governor Newsom and Secretary Kim for what I have come to understand as an extraordinary honor and opportunity. To each and every Caltrans employee that I had the true pleasure working with, which would be everyone, I view my term with great pride and know all success is due to you. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Bob. We'll now move on to Federal Highways. Vince?
It wasn't the feds that turned off the lights, right? Is that what we've learned today?
This time.
It wasn't the feds that turned off the lights. I'd like to welcome the two new commissioners. I'm sorry. I'm sorry, little guy, mustache, kind of bald.
Kinda?
Kinda. All right, fine. I'm all the way bald. My bad. That's by choice. So first, I want to express gratitude to Bob Franzoia also. It's always interesting how California does it. When you put somebody in a role, in an acting role, you do something like shake the earth. So in the first half an hour, Bob was in his position. Somebody shook the earth. You had your big earthquake in Central California, and I had an opportunity to see him in action immediately. Surrounded himself with good people. Jim Davis was right there with him and the rest of his team, and he listened and understood and questioned and challenged. So I thought it was very enjoyable to work with, and I appreciate the openness and the partnership that we had in the short time you were in the role. So thank you. And also thank you all for inviting us, the Federal Highway Administration, to the Tri-State Commission meeting. That was a great opportunity for my counterparts to interact and see the different roles that the different commissions have. I think it's very interesting, the important role that you have in transportation in California, and my counterparts in Washington and Oregon thought it was very interesting to see the interaction and the depth that we deal with here in California. It's something I don't think they deal with at that level. And so August redistribution, we got $330 million in August redistribution. I didn't do the math at the time, but that's probably in the more than 15 or 16 states getting their entire program all year. California gets in August, so it's a testament. And I think there's some misperception on where that money comes from. So that money isn't a state couldn't use their money. Like every state spends all their money in their program. What that is there's other programs that had some money remaining. It's a TIFIA program and some other programs where they didn't spend all the money this year. So that's the opportunity for the August redistribution. So $330 million this year, and that's a no-brainer, easy thing for California to deliver. So I appreciate the work that Caltrans does to make sure that happens. A couple other things. So we have EPA and NHTSA. We talked about the Safe Reg. You're talking about having a workshop in November on the Safe Reg. We're treating the Safe Reg like it happened, because it did happen. I've had a couple people ask me, so, what are we going to do? What do we think about? What's going to happen next? I'm like, well, the Safe Reg happened. It passed, or Part 1 passed. So in 60 days, that the Safe Reg kicks in. Now we're trying to work with EPA and our headquarters in NHTSA to figure out really what that means from an implication standpoint. So we're still working with EPA to get some guidance, in our headquarters to get some guidance on how we're going to be implementing that. We're going to look for every opportunity to exercise any flexibilities we have, but we have to stay clearly within the law. We're working right now with Caltrans and all the locals to try and get any amendment we can to any of the FSTIPs that you have in your regions. So get them in. We're moving very quickly. I want to thank my team back in Sacramento and here or down in LA for the work they're putting in to make sure we're getting those amendments in time. There was another letter from EPA on the 24th of September talking about SIPs. And how if they can't be, or if they're not approvable, you got 130 some in the queue, and if they're not approvable, then you need to pull them out and work with EPA, or California Air Resources Board needs to work with EPA. There was a lot of big scare that happened in that that was happening right now tomorrow. The assessment of whether those SIPs could be approved or not is happening quickly. The process to put somebody into a lapse and all those other things is a longer process. That's got to go into the Federal Register. Then there's 2 years before the sanctions kick in. So it has a lot to do with the Federal Register, public notice, and everything else. So I think I wanted to just make sure everybody knew that there was a process to that. It's still happening. It's real. But there is a process to that. It's not something that, okay, here are sanctions, hit tomorrow. So just wanted to share that with you. Then two, I got a text from one of my team this morning saying, hey, Vince, there's something on the agenda about the performance management benchmarking with structures and everything. Mm-hmm. And Federal Highway has a very large role in the performance management process, obviously. The bridge inspection and pavement inspection program here in California has to follow the national federal requirements. It does. We work very closely with Caltrans on it, so I'll be interested to see on the report. But my team was telling me that report's in line with all of our requirements and regulations, so just wanted to share that. And then lastly, I was walking through my office the other day, and I had a guy from our resource center in Federal Highway. We've got a Federal Lands Highway Division that works in national parks. We got a resource center that is out doing training and everything else. And he was in there. I asked him, what is he doing? He said, oh, I'm in here talking about balanced mix design. Yay. What is balanced mix design? And he said, California is a leader in the country in that. And I said, oh, well, tell me a little bit more about it. So that's the balancing of rutting and cracking resistance. So the I-5 project in downtown Sacramento, it's innovative. It's kind of the cutting edge there. It's looking to try and have a stronger pavement that balances rutting and cracking. And so it's innovation happening here in California. And I was asking, where are you at? Where are we at with that? And he goes, oh, you're the leaders in the country. So the rest of the country is watching California to do this. So I just wanted to congratulate Caltrans on being that leader. And I thought it was kind of neat that somebody outside of California goes, hey, California's a leader in that.
I think
and
it's due to your leadership.
There it is. Clearly, I'll take full credit with my leadership. There's no question about it. And I think that is all I had. Did I say continuing resolution until November? So we're federal government is working on a continuing resolution until November 21st. Got the FAST Act goes till 2020, and then we have appropriations every year that actually funds each of the authorizations, and our appropriations ends at the end of September. So October 1, we had a continuing resolution that takes us to November 21st. So that's our funding that is available is till November 21st. And that's all I have.
Any questions for Vince?
Yay.
Vince, I thought we told you we didn't like the safe rule.
You did. You did. I made a note of it. It's in my other paper. It was in my pocket. I forgot what it was. I just learned how to spell it, so I'm getting good.
Apparently, the message didn't get through.
Well, clearly.
Okay, if you can, because this is very important, and I think we have an agenda item later, but it's no laughing matter to all of our partners, so I don't mean to make light of it at all. So whenever you get info from EPA on how you're going to deal with this,
We're on the agenda right now. We're on the
permits?
agenda for your workshop. So CTC reached out to us to ask to be on the agenda. We're going to be on the agenda, and yeah, this is a daily issue that we're working with our headquarters to figure out what the implications are. We're moving forward with it, but we're just trying to figure out what it means.
Okay.
Really.
Okay, because SB1, we all fought hard.
Right.
to keep
Right.
them.
No question
Okay.
about it. All right.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right, now we're going to move on to item 10, regional agencies. Philip?
Good morning, Chairman, and welcome to our new commissioners. Philip Chu here with San Bernardino County Transportation Authority here to provide an update for you from the Regional Transportation Planning Agency Group. The group met yesterday afternoon and discussed a number of topics. First off, we received an update from CalCal, CalARB, FHWA on the safe vehicle rules. The group will continue to monitor on updates and work closely with all agencies involved to mitigate any impact on transportation projects. The group also received update on SB1 Cycle 2 program implementation and continues to participate on guidelines development workshop on SB1 programs. On behalf of the RTPA group, I would like to thank the CTC staff on their effort to align the implementation schedule across the SB1 programs. Now, having the schedule aligned across the competitive program will help streamline project selections and application preparations. And as Vince has mentioned, California received a healthy amount of August redistribution this year. And the regional agency worked closely with Caltrans and were able to bring all resendable fund apportionment balance to zero with the August redistribution amount. I would like to thank Ray Zhang and his staff on this effort to working with the regional agency on this effort. We're also excited to work with Caltrans on a Lean Six Sigma process on CTC allocation requests. This will help streamline the allocation request process and improve project delivery schedules. That pretty much concludes my presentation here, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Do we have any questions? Hearing none. Thank you, Philip. We'll now move on to rural counties. Woodrow?
Good morning, Commissioners, Chair Inman, Director Branson, Secretary Kim, and Senator Bell. Woodrow Deloria with El Dorado County Transportation Commission, representing the Rural Counties Task Force. The big guy with the full beard, and I'm proudly bald. So, the Rural Counties Task Force met on September 27th to discuss several issues and opportunities facing our vast geography of our 26 rural counties. The RCTF members are looking forward to participating in the upcoming SB1 guidelines development workshops and subsequent competitive funding rounds. We are currently working with CTC staff to review the calendar of program workshops to ensure that rural counties have a voice in all of those programs. During the September 27th meeting, RCTF members received an update on the Solutions for Congested Corridors program, guidelines, and expressed support for Commission's staff recommendation to establish a goal to program one small project per year or two per cycle with a maximum of 15% of total funding to small jurisdictions under a population of 250,000. Additionally, during the meeting, the RCTF received a presentation on the update of the California Transportation Plan, and our rural partners understand and value the importance of developing a statewide plan that serves all of California. We have once the California Transportation Plan framework is well underway, we look forward to continue working with Caltrans through coordination and partnership on the development of the Interregional Transportation Strategic Plan, or ITSP, We've already reached out to Caltrans to discuss rural county involvement in the ITSP, and I just spoke with Marlon Flournoy yesterday, and we're pleased to hear that the rural agencies will have opportunities to participate fully in the ITSP development to ensure that rural interregional systems are included in that plan. And I'd like to thank Commissioner Van Konynenberg for considering and elevating the importance of rural participation in the ITSP, and we look forward to reporting out on our engagement of that planning process. Our CTF members also received a presentation on the impacts of the new safe vehicle rule, and that presentation was made by CalCog's expert on the matter, Tanisha Taylor. We appreciate that from Tanisha, and we look forward to working with our regional and state partners to help resolve that issue facing all of our regions. Finally, at the September meeting, the rural counties discussed the recent efforts of the TDA task force, revisiting the Transportation Development Act from 1971, the use of the funds allocated within that act, and the performance analytics that are currently used to measure transit service. The task force is currently comprised of 17 regional planning and transit agencies, but does not include an RCTF representative. And while we understand the scale of urban transit services dwarfs our rural transit needs, many rural communities rely on TDA funding to provide critical life services to rural residents, many of whom are low-income seniors who rely on that service. So consequently, RCTF is requesting that the task force include RCTF member for participation, and will be attending the next 2 meetings of that task force. That concludes my report. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Have any questions? Hearing none, we will move on. Keith Dunn, Self-Help Counties.
Thank you, Chairwoman, Commissioners, Executive Director Branson. I'd like to just take a second also and thank Bob for his service. In his tenure as a public servant, he's likely touched all of our lives in some capacity working on the Appropriations Committee, and the job that you did there was important, and as was this, and I just want to thank you for your years of dedication. Yeah, the mysteries of the appropriation. Someday we'll get the schematics on how all that works, but I would just like to say that I'm pleased to be here on behalf of the self-help counties. We're preparing for our annual conference, which I don't know about the numbers, but we're darn close to Mobility 21's numbers, and we're looking forward to our 30th conference, in which we're going to be discussing a number of important issues that are before the state and trying to continue our partnership with the department so that we can help implement the visions of this new governor and also keep the promise of the local voters who've passed sales tax measures to build infrastructure, and partnering with the state of California and the commission to get those priorities moved forward. So we're looking forward to seeing many of you. Hopefully all of you can join us. It's going to be in Coronado this year, a beautiful part of the world, and we're looking forward to being down there and having those discussions.
And the dates, Keith?
It's November 17th, 18th, and 19th. Okay. And we will look forward to the Executive Director Branson's report, which we look forward to every year. Saying that, we're actively participating in all of your processes and comments on the development and continued development of SB1. The Safe Roads program has, I will say we're very concerned. I spent a week in Washington, D.C., talking with folks about that program and how it's going to potentially impact California. We shall see. We're continuing to discuss the FAA's interpretation of how excise tax on aviation fuel is spent. I think that we have continued concerns, but we're working with the state of California and the Department of Finance on putting together a response that we're hopeful that the FAA will deem as acceptable. I think that the state and the Department of Finance has done an admirable job. They went back and visited with the administrator of the FAA, and I think got some additional direction in how we can be compliant. From a self-help perspective, we've got some concerns just on the policy side of things, and it was a shift that took place over time in Congress, and there's some debates among members of Congress on whether or not they're going to redirect that policy to what it had been prior to 2016. Looking at the legislative year ahead, we're anticipating sponsoring some legislation to help our local agencies comply with some of the new policies that are coming forward, so that we're in step with the state and the policies that this governor has put as a priority, and we're looking forward to working with Director Kim, Secretary Kim, I'm sorry, and having you be successful in your mission and kind of making sure that we're compliant with all the air quality and different greenhouse gas policies moving forward. So with that, we're looking forward to our continued partnership, looking forward to working with the commission, and welcome to the new commissioners. Very much looking forward to working with you in your new roles and getting to know you better. And with that, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Any questions? Keith, how much money, so the FAA rules shifted, or the interpretation of that, in 2016. What's the dollar amount of the shift?
So while we've had some difficulties in getting those precise numbers, because it's the way that aviation fuels are calculated, international flights don't count against that tax. So DOF has done an admirable job trying to get an exact number, but it's in the hundreds of millions, impacting obviously the larger airports more than the rural airports. And again, the shift in that policy wasn't an act of law. It was an administrative action that sometimes are a little more difficult to unravel. So we've been working very closely with our delegation. I think that there's growing concern across the nation as more and more states institute voter-approved directed sales tax or other taxes for specific purposes. So we'll continue that fight. We're, like many of you, the current climate in Washington is not necessarily conducive to getting things done. So we shall continue those dialogues and see what happens with Congress. I'm not very optimistic that there's going to be a lot of action anytime soon. So we will be looking to at least comply with the current status, and then with an eye towards clarification at some point when perhaps Congress will be in the administration looking to act on issues of importance to the states.
Well, it's a lot of money.
Yeah.
Not just.
And it's annually.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the state of California has a role in that as well. So that's just the local share that we're aware of.
Okay. All right. No more questions for Keith? We will move on. Thank you, Keith. Item 13, ceylon.
Good morning, Commissioner Chair. This is an action item. Government Code Section 87302 require amendments of the Commission's Conflict of Interest Code to include positions that involve the making or participate in making of decisions that may foreseeably have a material effect on any financial interest. The proposed amendments will add a number of new positions that meet this requirement. The amendment also will rename the Assistant Executive Director position to Deputy Director and delete the position of Administrative Officer. California Code of Regulation, Title II, Division 6, Section 18750C requires the commissions to transmit the proposed amendment to the Office of Administrative Law for publication in the California Notice Register and file a copy with the Fair Political Practice Commissions. Staff recommends commission approval.
I have a motion by Commissioner Tavaloni, a second by Commissioner Gordino. Is there discussion? Hearing none, I'll call for the vote. All in favor? Aye. Anybody opposed? Anybody abstain? That motion carries. Okay, we have up next item number 14, but I'm first going to ask Senator Bell. We're delighted you're here with us today. Did you have anything you wanted to share?
Not much.
Oh man!
I think we're trying to figure out if the federal government's going to move on any substantive legislation given the impeachment controversy. So probably not. So probably be like a continuing resolution.
Yeah.
Kind of,
okay.
So we're kind of waiting to see what's happening. And there's a lot of people that are working on transportation bills right now. I mean, the legislature is the membership is currently formulating their next year, the 2020 legislative packages. So a lot of members are calling me up and wanting to know about different things. So that's what's going on.
And are you all talking much about the safe vehicle rule impacts and?
Well, yes, and we're also talking about scooters. Seems like that's a popular topic, as the special hearings that we're going to have on mobility and the scooters and how to regulate them. So that's sort of a lot of members are calling me up about that. We're going to have 2 hearings on that subject between the Assembly and the Senate. So.
Yes, Commissioner Gardino.
Chairman Bell, I drove over here yesterday on 580, the Altamont Pass, and I came all the way down the pass and I didn't need dental work at the end. Assuming that repaving is because of your work successfully on SB1. Is that accurate? And how are we getting the word out better about the successes that we're already seeing on SB1?
I think the work was not, I did not do the paving job myself. I think the Caltrans staff did it, and they did a great job on that contract. So we're excited that in terms of repaving, it's pretty, you see the performance reports here. So we're pretty excited about the fact that they're blasting out with all the repaving projects all over the state. It's amazing how much compliments we're getting on that. So good job, well done on the work. We're just blasting out a lot of projects all over the state. Everybody's very happy.
Okay, any more questions for Senator Bell? If not, Paul, we'll move to item 14.
Commissioners, tab 14 is an action item to accept the staff report on legislation being monitored. The deadline for the legislature to pass bills was September 13th. The governor has until this Sunday, October 13th, to sign or veto legislation. Of note, the governor recently signed AB 185 by Assemblymember Grayson to require the Department of Housing and Community Development to participate in the Joint Commission Air Resources Board meetings. The governor has not yet taken action on 2 additional bills which would impact programs under the commission's purview. Senate Bill 127 by Senator Wiener, which would require pedestrian and bicycle facilities on specified SHOP projects, as well as related performance targets in the Transportation Asset Management Plan. And also still pending on the governor's desk is SB 277 by Senator Bell, which would require the commission to use a formula for 85% of local partnership program funding. That concludes my remarks. I'm happy to take any questions.
Paul, when does the HCD officially joining our joint meetings take effect?
The legislation takes effect January 1st.
Okay, but they're coming tomorrow.
Correct.
Regardless. Yeah. Okay. Okay. Alrighty. Any questions? Okay. We have a motion by Commissioner Alvarado, a second by Commissioner Kehoe. Now, is there any discussion? 2 chances for discussion. Hearing none. All in favor? Aye. Anybody opposed? Anybody abstaining? That motion carries. We'll move on to item 15, budget and allocation capacity. Paul?
Commissioners, tab 15 is an information item on budget and allocation capacity. As part of this item, Caltrans will also present information on the current cash balances in the road maintenance and rehabilitation account and the state highway account. To have a better understanding of how these cash balances are expected to change moving forward, Commission staff have requested Caltrans to provide projections moving forward as part of its quarterly financial report. And with that, I will turn it over to Clark Paulson for a presentation.
Good morning, Commissioners. It's good to be here. I have not caught up with Vince or Woody in terms of the losing of the hair. I'm working on it. But the gray hair is doing just great. I appreciate Paul's comments, and Caltrans will be very happy to adjust our quarterly report to show a longer-term vision as it relates to our accounts and cash balances. I wanted to start the discussion today with just a review of where we stand as it relates to the current year's allocation capacity. We've had one meeting so far, which was in August, and you have allocated 1.9 billion of a total of 7.1 billion in allocation capacity, which is very nice progress to start the year at 27%. Just a quick note, we have added about $100 million to the SHOP allocation capacity based on higher than expected August redistribution receipts or authority from the federal government. I'll talk a little bit more about that as we proceed. As Paul mentioned, I want to talk a little bit about cash balances in two of our major accounts. The Road Maintenance Rehabilitation Account, or RMRA, at the end of the fiscal year, June 30th, had a balance of about 2.5 billion. This account is funded from SB1 increased tax revenues. We also have commitments against that account to the total of 3.6 billion. Now our commitments are higher than our cash balances, which is what we like. It may sound counterintuitive, but we consider cash flow of our allocated projects and the fact that they don't all spend money the moment we allocate them. And so we aggressively pursue putting projects out, taking into consideration the cash flow during the course of the projects, which is why our commitments are higher than our cash balances. The RMRA accumulation of funds is higher than is our desire and plan. The reason those funds have accumulated is that we have had major infusion since the enactment of SB1. And it does take time for us to bring forward projects that will use those resources. Before a project comes to fruition, as you're familiar with, we need to do project initiation, project design, environmental clearance, advertise and award the projects, and actually get to mobilization and starting working on the projects. About 25% of our projects spend money, or 25% of the funds are spent on the design, environmental clearance, et cetera. 75% of those of the project costs happen when we actually get to capital outlay and are constructing the project. And even in the first year of a project's initiation, we only spend about 12% of the contract amount because of the mobilization factors. So the bottom line is we're moving, we're catching up with the revenue, but that will take time. It's worth noting that, and has been alluded to in the work that's been done, in the earliest stages of SB1 funding, we attempted to mitigate and focus use of resources on smaller scale maintenance projects, paving and so forth, to get those resources under work for projects that move quicker. But we're now transitioning into larger scale SHOP projects, which have taken more time to bring forward. We are working aggressively to bring those projects forward. And in fact, this fiscal year has the largest anticipated SHOP contract delivery in the history of the SHOP. So bottom line, we're catching up with the resources that have come forward. I also will talk about the state highway account fund balance, which at the end of this past fiscal year was 1.8 billion. The state highway account funds primarily are received through gas excise tax revenues. This is a really complex fund that is the driver for Caltrans operations, local assistance, and many of our transportation programs. We, in this case, have commitments against the account balances of $4 billion, similar to the RMRA, where we're cash flowing and maximizing the projects that we're bringing forward. Several years ago, some of you recall, as the economy took a significant downturn, we had to figuratively slam on the brakes of our transportation programs. And since that time, as revenues have recovered, we have been figuratively putting our foot on the accelerator to bring forward projects and use the resources. We have been very reluctant to slam on the accelerator because that can lead to yo-yoing of our programs and put at risk our ability to meet our commitments. And so over the past two fund estimates, we've included assumptions and resources to work towards pressing down on the accelerator. And we think that's starting to have a very positive effect. In the last half of last fiscal year, the balance of the state highway count has come down significantly. And will continue in that pattern. One final note, in my career in transportation in California, I've learned that numbers are very large. I sometimes get confused about the number of zeros I'm talking about. But the fact is, at first blush, numbers in California transportation sometimes seem alarming in their size. Just for comparison, I did a little research. Similar states, Texas and New York, have cash balances in the range of $8 billion. And they haven't had quite the influx of revenue that California has. So these big numbers are alarming. They're bigger than we prefer. We're working towards putting those resources into work. But that is sometimes a factor in terms of the size of our programs. I wanted to talk briefly about August redistribution. This is the federal funding program where the Federal Highways tries to ensure that all of the resources available at the federal level are used during a fiscal year. And so unused resources are made available late in the fiscal year for states to pursue. California has always been very aggressive in pursuing funds through August redistribution. This past year, we received $330 million in total through August redistribution. Over the last 10 years, we've received $2.2 billion, which I can proudly say is the highest level for any state in the nation. These funds are larger than normal, partly because of some of the federal grant programs that have not been fully used nationwide, and those resources have come through August redistribution. We more or less have to give some of that back in the next year's apportionments. However, we put those funds to use, and in a way, it's an advancement of funds that we would have been using later. It's worth noting that in order to qualify for August redistribution funding, a state has to come forward and say, here are the projects that we will use these funds on. They have to be used essentially within a month. And so it's not as if this is a pot of money that we aren't sure what we're going to do with. It's already been used. And finally, although this could be a little premature, the Senate did bring forward a proposal for a new federal Transportation Act. The current FAST Act expires on September 30 of 2020. The Senate committee passed out the America's Transportation Infrastructure Act. This is very early in the process, and the timeline would likely be protracted. But just to get a flavor of what has been proposed, the proposal calls for $4.8 billion that would come to California during the 5-year period of the act, which is roughly a 24% increase from the prior act. There are programs that are specified in this act to address safety, wildlife crossing mitigation, resiliency, greenhouse gas emission reductions, and bridge investments, as well as continuing the research opportunities for alternate tax revenue for transportation. So with that, I will conclude and be happy to address any questions you may have.
Yes, Commissioner Kehoe, and then Commissioner Gomez. Kehoe first.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Clark, I'm very happy that you addressed the cash balance at the outset. So it's good to know that you have a really strong grasp on the Commission's commitment to moving our SB1 funds and other resources out as quickly as possible. We want the voters to know that their tax dollars are being put to good use all across the state. And I have to say, I have seen, anecdotally on my travels around, a whole lot of repaving and local streets and roads measures and freeway measures. Of course, in San Diego, we have some very big projects going forward. You talked about the cash balance, I guess, coming down as the projects are mobilized.
Right.
How much time is that, are you anticipating? And then the longer projections that staff has asked you to produce, how long? Is that going to be a 2-year time frame or more?
Sure. So the reporting will now incorporate a 24-month time frame. Okay. Sometimes as you get into farther out years, there's so many dynamics, it's difficult to have a real precise forecast, although we make those efforts. In terms of a construction contract, our historical analysis, I mentioned the first year spends about 12%. The good news is that the second year spends about 50%. And then as you get into the third year, 28% and declining from there. As we get in, I mentioned a very large delivery of shop projects during this year. The next year from the time of award, whenever that happens, will incorporate that 12%, right. But then we get into the 50% in the following years. And so I would expect as we bring forward our forecasts going out 24 months, we'll see a steady decline of those resources in both accounts.
Thank you. We'll definitely keep an eye on it, and I know you will too, so I thank you for the information.
Sure. This, and I'll just reiterate, this is very important. We spend a lot of time, this is far from crystal ball. There's a lot of analytics and an effort invested to make sure we're doing the right thing to use the resources and maintain appropriate balances so that we can continue meeting our commitments. Thank you.
Thanks.
Yes, Commissioner Gometti?
Yeah, Clark, just a quick question. Does the federal government give us any idea how we're going to fund ATIA?
Well, yes and no. The dollar amount that is proposed is less than what the Federal Highway Trust Fund is currently bringing in. And so the proposal is not, as I understand it, formulated specific enough to say whether there would be additional transportation revenue or whether, as the case has been in recent years, augmentation from the general fund. And so I think that's one of the things to be ironed out as things move forward.
But there's been no discussion that you know of in terms of increasing, for example, gas tax, federal gas tax?
Only at the highest conceptual level.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Commissioner Van Kynenberg, did you have your hand up?
Yeah, I just want to confirm, when we have these high balances, the interest income off of this is coming back into the program, correct?
Absolutely correct.
However, my understanding is on the road maintenance and rehabilitation account, it's not statutorily required.
Correct. So there has been just, well, so the statute didn't require the interest to be retained.
Right.
Caltrans has brought forward this to the Department of Finance and State Controller's Office, and they have agreed to retain the interest earnings on those funds in the RMRA account.
So if someone was a head of the Senate Transportation Committee, maybe they could put forward some legislation in the future to make sure that those funds, those interest funds, are maybe protected in the future for the shop account. That would be great.
Sounds like something we would be excited about.
I didn't see the note-taking down there. Clark, I have a question for you. The $330 million redistribution, what was the nationwide? So what percentage did we get?
Oh, boy. I
can do the math if you tell me the total number.
Yeah, I can't remember that either. Okay. My staff has provided that information to me, but my brain cells haven't retained it.
Vince, do you know?
It's a lot.
I'll say this. The state receives 10% typically on overall federal funds. The August redistribution share is higher than that, but I'll get back to you with specifics.
Well, because it's hard to know if that's good or bad. I mean, who's going to say $330 million isn't good? But relatively speaking, historically, it seems to me like we have really done exceedingly well in that category. So, which is unusual. We don't necessarily, all the other categories, feel like we're getting our fair share. So I'd be interested to learn what we can learn about that and why let's emulate that success elsewhere.
Sure.
Vince?
we will we'll follow up to give you information.
Okay. Thank you. Appreciate it. Any further questions? If not, we will move on then. We are now at item 16, right? Paul?
Commissioners, tab 16 is an action item to support the California Federal Surface Transportation Reauthorization Principles, a document to be submitted to Congress for its consideration when drafting the next Surface Transportation Act. The principles were developed over the last several months by a Caltrans-led working group consisting of representatives of MPOs, transportation providers, private sector, labor, and other stakeholder groups. Commission staff also participated in the work group. The principles call for new user-based federal revenues for transportation and address funding priorities for goods movement, transit, transportation infrastructure resiliency, and other important areas. Caltrans has led similar work groups in the past to develop federal consensus principles, most recently in 2015 for the FAST Act. The Commission has in the past declared its support for those principles. Commission staff have reviewed the current document and recommend that you declare your support for it. And with that, I'll turn it over to Giles Giovanazzi for more detail on the document.
Thank you very much. Good morning, members of the California Transportation Commission. I'm Giles Giovanazzi, the Chief of Staff of the California Department of Transportation. This morning, I would like to provide a short summary of the California Federal Surface Transportation Reauthorization Consensus Principles. Prior to working for Caltrans, I worked several years in Congress for the House Transportation and Infrastructure Committee, so I've taken the lead in developing these consensus principles with Caltrans staff and California transportation stakeholders. The current 5-year surface transportation authorizing law, known as the FAST Act, expires in September 2020. Some congressional committees have already started the process of reauthorizing federal surface transportation programs. In late July, the U.S. Senate Environment and Public Works Committee approved the America's Transportation Infrastructure Act of 2019, a 5-year reauthorization of Federal Highway Administration programs. Other House and Senate committees are reportedly developing policy and drafting their portions of the new law. These consensus principles represent high-level policy direction for reauthorization that have a broad base of support from California transportation stakeholders. To date, 30 organizations representing MPOs, counties, transit providers, Native American tribes, rural and urban groups, and other stakeholders are listed as signatories. The consensus principles describe the critical importance of California's transportation infrastructure to the national economy and note the infrastructure investment Californians are making through SB 1 and local measures. The principles call for Congress to restore the solvency of the Federal Highway Trust Fund and provide stability through a 6-year surface transportation reauthorization bill. We ask Congress for increased funding and a few adjustments to existing FAST Act authorized programs. For example, we ask for additional National Highway Performance Program and Surface Transportation Block Grant Program funding. These programs support California's Highway Bridge Program and other critical state and local programs and projects. Additionally, we ask Congress to consider new funding programs, flexibility, or policies to address emerging issues, including making our infrastructure more resilient to climate change. In fact, the U.S. Senate EPW committee bill creates a new resiliency grant program. The document also describes California's status as the nation's international trade leader and urges Congress to increase funding and flexibility for federal freight programs. Moreover, a section of the consensus principles describe California's climate action policy leadership. We ask Congress to reward states like California that are advancing sustainability strategies. We also recommend some specific policy actions, such as providing statutory flexibility that will allow successful deployment of zero-emission vehicle infrastructure on the interstate. Further, we urge Congress to fund multimodal mobility solutions. We make a number of policy recommendations that are supported by Caltrans staff, the California Transit Association, and the California Association for Coordinated Transportation, such as growing core federal transit programs and funding the FDA's Capital Investment Grant Program at a minimum $2.6 billion level. We also recommend that federal funding for programs that support we also recommend that federal funding for programs that support California's active transportation program be increased. With regard to project delivery, the consensus principles describe the work we are doing in California to streamline the project delivery process. We also ask Congress to consider lengthening the statutory term of years for NEPA assignment agreements. Finally, the consensus principles make policy recommendations regarding tribal transportation programs that have been endorsed by Caltrans Native American Advisory Committee. It also asks Congress to review recent changes to the Tribal Transportation Technical Assistance Program to ensure the program is meeting the needs of its tribal customers. We hope the Commission can support the California Federal Surface Transportation Reauthorization Consensus Principles. We believe these principles will provide a unified high-level policy advocacy platform as Congress develops the next reauthorization bill. And with that, I'll take any questions.
We have questions? Yes, Commissioner Van Kynenberg.
Either a question for you or the Secretary. Secretary, you were most recently in Washington, D.C. Are we putting our best foot forward in comparison to other states in terms of our advocacy for our state? Do we have we put enough resources into our team, our advocacy team back there, to get our points made to the right decision makers, do you think?
Commissioner, I will say that during my time at DOT and the Federal Highway Administration, we always heard from California stakeholders, and so they have a regular and large presence, and so I would fully expect that to continue. Not just the state, but all of the stakeholders within the state, and the consensus principles Giles outlined really reflect that partnership between the state and all of our local partners as well. So yes, in a nutshell, yes, California has a huge presence in Washington. We heard from them all the time, and that's a good thing. And I also want to point out that the governor's office in D.C. is very, very active, robust, and they are leading the way when it comes to federal advocacy.
Okay. I'll move for approval.
Second.
We have a motion by Commissioner Van Kynenberg, a second by Commissioner Dunn. Is there discussion? Giles, I have a couple questions. One, when we had the National Freight Advisory Committee, we had a number of recommendations. Did you go back? Some of those ended up in the current FAST Act, but we also, those of us that were on that committee, thought that we had some other good recommendations. Did you take a look at those and include those?
So I've seen some of them not over the course of a couple of years of doing this job. Some of them were incorporated in AASHTO's policy positions, and I think some of them were incorporated, for example, trying to have more flexibility for for some of the freight programs to use for multimodal projects. That was incorporated in our principles document.
Okay, because I know we had 32 till we got sent back home by the DOT, David. But I think, one of the criticisms, or it wasn't a criticism, a suggestion, was we talk a lot about multimodal, but we're not really structured multimodally, and we felt that we still get hung up in our silos. So if there's a way to really encourage all of us that actually deliver on these to have those multimodal, and I look at it as our alternative energy journey. Clearly, we need a lot more support from the Department of Energy and coordination and integration. So I think in that regard, and then the grade crossings, the grade separation money is, what, $100 million or something for the whole United States, and we could spend that on one. And it's our journey to get more folks onto the rail, more freight onto the rail. We need even more in that account. I think it's just a little, it's never really been a big enough focus. And, we've had some tremendous success in California with ACE, and the strategic targeted, we only do grade separations and we do them efficiently and effectively. So I think if there's some way, and I know you already have a whole bunch of folks who've signed on, so you probably can't make changes here. But I think for all of us collectively, especially when we get precision scheduling railroading, which means we're going to see longer freight trains coming through our communities. So I think we all need more grade SEP resources to be able to make all these things work. And then just finally, when I look at those that have signed on to the letter, they're all the folks that would be receiving these funds. And I think the letter is going to be much more effective if we get some of our business community partners to sign on too, so that when we go to Washington, it really is a concerted effort, because if I'm the plumber and I'm asking for plumbing funding, they kind of look at me and say, of course you want that. But when you have a broad spectrum, and I think Mobility 21, that was really one of the founding principles that we started with the business community and our agency partners, saying, hey, we're all working together. So I would encourage this to really be much broader based, because otherwise I think people say, of course you want that. That's, right. That's a business you're in. So however we can help you do that, most of us, we all have day jobs, so other day jobs.
So a couple different thoughts. On grade separations, the principals do talk about wanting to increase funding for the Section 130 program. Also, there was an issue with wanting to go back to 100% federal match. So I think in a lot of instances, particularly with rural communities, they don't have enough to put in the 10% local match. So we've advocated for that. I think that was actually included in the Senate ATIA bill. Good. And then there is a component of the larger freight programs. We're asking for an increase in freight funding. There was a focus on grade separations with the formation of these freight programs that were created in the FAST Act. So that's another avenue where you could have larger grade separation projects, obviously traditionally through programs like BILL, but then infra and so forth. And then, the list that we have right now is what we have, but the reauthorization process will go on probably for several months, and if additional signers can come on, we'll just add them to the document that we have. So.
Well, let's link arms and make I think we're better together. Yes, Commissioner Norton.
To say that this morning, Secretary Kim was talking about the governor's executive order and how it's moving towards aligning housing, transportation, the environment, and the economy. What's your impression of what you feel the federal government is doing in the same ways to try to connect up all of those policies so that we can invest with these multiple bottom line improvements together?
So I don't know about aligning, but it's an excellent question. And I think one of the distinguishing features of the Senate ATIA bill that got introduced, which I think it had a very strong, it had a title specifically devoted to climate change, and created a resiliency grant program, incentive programs for climate change programs. And I think that people were not expecting the bipartisan Senate bill, and that's what's important. It was a bipartisan bill to go that far with what they did. I think the expectation is that you will likely see an even stronger statement of that in the House. So I think there is, I think the reauthorizations, they have certain themes. Clearly, freight was a big theme of the FAST Act. I think that this issue of resiliency and climate change is sort of the issue going into this reauthorization cycle. So I think the state, given our leadership and the decade of policy leadership we have through SB 375 and the various climate policies we're working through, I think we're well positioned for leadership in trying to influence federal policy. We have a strong presence on the House Transportation Infrastructure Committee. Is it 7 or 10 members or something close to that on the T&I committee? So I think that the power of our we have a very powerful delegation in the House, in the majority, so I think we're well positioned to influence federal policy in this area, and our letter speaks to that.
That's wonderful news. Thank you so much.
Sure.
Any other questions? Hearing none, we have a motion. I'll call for the vote. All in favor? Aye. Anybody opposed? Anybody abstaining? Motion carries. Thank you. Okay, we'll now move on to item 17. Laura.
Good morning, Commissioners. This is an informational item. Marlon Flournoy, who is Chief of Caltrans Division of Transportation Planning, will provide a brief update on their current efforts in preparing the California Transportation Plan, the Interregional Transportation Strategic Plan, and the California Freight Mobility Plan. As these plans are developed, the Commission will be asked to review them and provide comments. These statewide plans provide important overarching policy direction. They guide Caltrans and partner agency investment priorities, and ultimately they serve as foundational planning documents for our upcoming discretionary funding cycles. So with that, I will turn it over to Marlon for his presentation.
Good morning.
Morning.
Thank you for the opportunity to come and talk to you about our efforts in regards to our California Transportation Plan, our Freight Mobility Plan, and our Interregional Transportation Plan. A couple of things that I think is important to note. The California Transportation Plan provides the overall vision and policy framework, not only for Caltrans, but the California transportation system. And both the ITSP and the CFMP, along with other modal plans, implement the policies that are laid out in the CTP and guides transportation investments necessary to meet the California Transportation Plan. It's also important to note that Caltrans is in the process right now of integrating new policy direction, including the governor's executive order, into the CTP, the ITSP, and the CFMP. All right, so first I'm going to talk a little bit about what we're doing with the California Transportation Plan. So just going back a little bit, for the California Transportation Plan 2040, which was released in 2016, it promotes livable communities, cost-effective transportation solutions, and reiterates the fix-it-first approach in an effort to improve operations and lower maintenance cost. The CTP 2050 looks to build on the 2040 plan and create a robust and innovative policy plan that incorporates new rounds of regional transportation plans, including the sustainable community strategies, rail and transit plans, as well as tribal plans. It also addresses new legislative requirements, including federal performance and target setting, state performance measurements, as well as including 743, SB 743, and other executive orders in regards to carbon neutrality and electrification. It also expands on innovation, including how people are traveling now in different ways, including shared mobility, app-driven marketplaces, and we're also exploring new ideas, including connected autonomous vehicles. Since the 2016 plan, or 2040, there's also been some new funding sources that have been approved. At the statewide level, the SB1 program, there's also been new local ballot measures across the state that expands the opportunity for transportation investment. And also includes analytical tools as well. So we've updated our travel demand model to include freight and passenger travel, and it also includes adopted growth forecast. In terms of the timeline, we are, well, as of this year, in March, or February, March of this year, we've hosted a number of workshops throughout the state, including Sacramento, Fresno, LA, and San Diego, to get some targeted feedback from stakeholders. And at the beginning of 2020, we'll be releasing the draft CTP to the public, and we'll be hosting a series of workshops. And what we're hoping to do is, once we get the feedback from stakeholders, we'll be incorporating that feedback and then going through the review and approval process with the intent of completing the plan by the end of 2020. In regards to the Interregional Transportation Plan, this is a planning document that provides guidance for the identification and prioritization of interregional transportation priorities. The ITSP guides the development of the ITIP and includes intercity rail corridors and a subset of routes that are identified in California's legislatively designated interregional road system. In terms of timing, there is a statutory requirement that the ITSP be consistent with the CTP. With this said, once we get a little bit further along with CTP, we're going to start the development of the ITSP in early 2020. and we'll be holding a series of workshops in the spring with the goal of really laying out a framework where we can have a good relationship with our partners and have them have the opportunity to provide feedback throughout the process, including the Rural County Task Force. So we're very much looking forward to that opportunity. In regards to the freight mobility plan, it includes a number of new components. Just to provide a little bit of background, in 2018, Caltrans submitted an addendum to the 2014 freight plan that addresses new FHWA requirements. And so one of the things that this plan will include is to make sure that we don't have that separate document as an addendum, but it's all going to be incorporated into the one freight plan. A couple of highlights to point out in regards to some of the new elements include the designation of critical urban and rural freight corridors, considerations of a significant congestion or delay caused by freight, and strategies to mitigate, and also a freight investment plan that provides a list of projects that use federal freight formula dollars. Also, a couple of highlights that are going to be new to the CFMP. So since then, we've completed the California Sustainable Freight Action Plan, which is also incorporated into the CFMP. And we are going to be highlighting some of the ongoing pilot projects that were identified in that plan. Zero emission vehicle action plan has also been a highlight, as well as the establishment of a community air protection program to reduce exposure in communities most impacted by air pollution, as well as a variety of funding programs to fund clean energy transportation specific to freight. Also, we've been coordinating with the regions on developing regional freight investment strategies that speak to the unique context of each of those regions. And we're also developing a state freight investment strategy that speaks to the projects that are most critical to the state. And I'll touch on this on the next slide. And then lastly, sustainable freight integration is also a key piece in this, where we've included the principles from the California Sustainable Freight Action Plan. I'm just going to briefly touch on the state themes. In terms of improving port access and reliability, one of the concerns that we've heard from our partners is the lack of reliability at our marine ports. So for this theme, we're really looking for projects to support reliable movement of goods to and from our ports. That includes imports and exports. For sustainability and innovation, we're looking for projects that move the needle to help support the three pillars of sustainability: economy, equity, and the environment. So example projects of this might be intelligent transportation systems, renewable energy, transportation infrastructure, and these projects will provide benefits to workforce, community, and health. For border efficiency, Mexico is one of California's biggest trading partners, especially when there's a significant back and forth movement between the two sides and the manufacturing process. And so we're really looking for projects that provide more demand management, technology integration with existing systems. And then lastly, in regards to the interregional freight movement and resiliency, California obviously is a large state, and we want to make sure that we have a robust interregional transportation network that increases California's economic competitiveness. We have cargo traveling to and from our ports, so we need to make sure that we have a reliable system that facilitates these movements. And also, I think it's important to note that we need to be looking at disruptions from wildfires, landslides, flooding, and make sure that we have a resilient system and we're protecting these assets. Associated with the themes, one of the things that we're really looking at is developing a list of projects that support these themes. So attached to the freight plan will be a series of projects that will be looking at rail, highway, port, and border projects. We recently had a meeting with the California Freight Advisory Committee where we were able to get some input from them in terms of where we're headed with some of the projects. And so we're looking to take that input and incorporate it into the plan. In terms of the revised schedule, I think it's important to point out that this plan isn't about the TSIP program. I think it's about looking at our freight priorities across the state and making sure that it's a plan that's funding agnostic. And so we're not necessarily just focusing on one program. Obviously, there are a lot of programs that can support freight, and so we want to make sure that a plan reflects that. So in terms of timing here, in December, we're planning on rolling out the draft plan. And we'll be providing a presentation to the commission at that time. We'll be releasing the plan. We think it's really important to have a robust public review process, including getting feedback from the commission. So that's going to last 2 months. And during that time, we'll also provide some engagement to the Freight Advisory Committee at an early January meeting. And then we're hoping to come back at the end of January to hear your feedback in terms of your comments about the plan. And then we'll be completing the plan by the end of March. Now, I think it's important to note, while it's less than ideal that the completion of the plan was pushed out, we really appreciate working with the commission staff to coordinate activities between the guidelines and the development of the plan. But we do think it's the right decision to move the plan out for a couple of reasons. First of all, we want to make sure that we have ample time to include the policy direction, incorporating that into the plan. But we also want to make sure that we're not rushing the public input process as well. And so we want to make sure that we're getting the right feedback and we're developing the right plan for that. So, and then lastly, we want to make sure that we have an opportunity to better align the plan with the California Transportation Plan. So we recently, in regards to the California Transportation Plan, we recently had a policy advisory committee where we covered some of the goals and vision and got some great feedback. And so we'll be hoping to wrap that up by the end of the year, and I think we'll be able to get a lot of that input into the California Freight Mobility Plan. So with that said, I will take any questions that you guys have.
Questions? Yes. Commissioner Kehoe?
Thank you, Madam Chair. This is on, right? Mm-hmm. Thank you. Excellent presentation, and I wanted to thank you for including the U.S.-Mexico border. I'm from San Diego, and we, view the border there as an economic gateway to all of California, and it's currently, the busiest land port in the world, we're told, at almost every meeting, and it's very high tech. The freight crossings, the CHP office are very, very highly digital work is being done there now. But we still have a lot of queuing on the south side of the border, which leads to air quality issues and other congestion issues. So more work needs to be done. And we have to remember, too, the California border goes all the way over to Arizona. So Tecate and Calexico are also busy crossings, far less, smaller operations than Otay and San Ysidro, but really important as well. So I'm glad you're thinking about it. We're doing good, but more needs to be done, I guess, is the message I would like to leave you with. And I know Fran has been down there numerous times and keeps a sharp eye on freight. So,
The board did go.
Yes.
To view the board.
And we'll be back down in Otay in a couple weeks, some of us anyway.
Other
Thank you.
comments?
Great, thank you.
Commissioner Dunn, did you? Oh, I'm sorry. I don't care. We'll go over here and then we'll come back. Commissioner Dunn.
Thanks, Marlon, for your presentation. Appreciate it. Just a process question. When I look at a plan that was developed for 2040, and now we're working on a plan, a visionary plan for 2050, the first thing I would do is go back and look at the 2040 plan, and I'd say what worked, what didn't work. I wouldn't start with a clean piece of paper with 2050, which I don't think you do. In addition to adding all the new laws and the new thinking between the development of the two plans. Is there anything in your review of the 2040 plan, are you doing a one-pager for us that says, here was our vision for 2040, this is what didn't work, this is what did work, this is what we need to move forward on, and that's why we're looking at it for 2050? Do you see what I'm saying? I'm trying to look at both, you know, I mean, clearly in developing a plan for 2040, probably the vision, I'm going off of memory, included that we increase transit ridership. We failed in that one. And so when you develop a plan for 2050, are we looking at lessons that we learned for 2040 in that plan, and then trying to rethink, as opposed to just saying, you know, everybody should get out of their cars and run a train? Do you know what I'm saying? So I'm wondering if we're doing that kind of analytical thinking as we reflect on what was in the 2040 plan, and then carry it forward, change it, amend it, increase it for 2050.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does.
Yeah.
And, you know, as I mentioned, I think what we're doing is building off of the 2040 plan. But I guess to your point in terms of, you know, any sort of an analysis that kind of shows, you know, like the report card, you know, how do we do? And making sure that the new plan includes, you know, that type of feedback. Yeah, I think we can arrange to have something like that produced. And I'll need to go back to my team, but we can certainly do that.
Thanks.
Okay, now Commissioner Van Konynenberg.
Thank you, Marlon, for the work you're doing. In the current development of the California Freight Mobility Plan, is there any economic analysis being done regarding the different types of freight, inbound freight, the economic benefits of inbound freight versus outbound freight versus pass-through freight?
Yes, so we do have values and weight information both for inbound and outbound freight. And we do have top export commodities in California. Now, one of the caveats with our data set, it deals with exports, and it's difficult to tell what's being produced in California and staying in California versus what is being passed through California and moving out, you know, externally. So,
is that analysis including what's manufactured here in California? So let's say a truck that's carrying parts that were manufactured here in California that's going to New Jersey, that may have more economic benefit for California than something that was a load of shoes that was picked up at the port and just drives right through.
Yeah. So
how do we take that into account when we're putting the freight mobility plan together?
Yeah. So I know there's some limitations with the data set that we had purchased, but what I'm going to do is I'll write this down and make sure that I get the right response to you, because I don't want to mislead you.
Okay.
But I know we do have.
And there's research being done at different places around the state right now because logistics and freight has become such a big part of the economy especially in this area. That's going on.
Okay.
What are the benchmarks? You know, when you put together a plan that's 30 years on the horizon, how do we put in benchmarks of this is what we want to accomplish in 2 years, 5 years, and 10 years, 2030? And it's sometimes we put out the horizon so far that it's hard to benchmark along the way. As you put together the 2050 plan, will you have intermediate benchmarks that somehow whether we can hold the accountable or not, or how do you see that going forward?
Yeah, that's a good question. The 2050 plan, it's a high-level policy document,
right?
And it will have performance measures in there. Now, I would say in terms of how we carry out that plan, we're really going to be relying on the modal plans, the freight mobility plan, the interregional transportation strategic plan, towards an active California. Those plans are really going to be the conduit. And each of those plans are, to some extent, are going to be looking at short, medium, sort of long-term type needs.
Okay.
And I think probably at that level, we'll be doing that sort of analysis.
So my comment would be the same comment. Like 2 years ago, we had the rail plan. That's a long-term rail plan.
Yes.
It's very difficult if we don't have short-term benchmarks to know that we're making the progress we need to be making along the path, then it's a plan that stays on the shelf and doesn't do us a lot of good. And I'll just once again stress the importance of that the 2015 Interregional Transportation Strategic Plan was a plan that was developed under the constraints of pre-SB1. And it really cut a lot of manufacturers who are located in some of the minor areas of the state, cut off funding for their strategic corridors where they need to get their products to market. So I applaud you for including the rural community in the discussion, because they certainly were left out of the 2015 process. So thank you for doing that. I really appreciate it.
Okay. And one of the things I also want to clarify as well is, not only are the different modal plans that we have, not only will they, align with the CTP, but we also want to make sure that there's internal consistency across the plans. And so in terms of developing the freight mobility plan, it's going to complement the...
I assume that's why you're doing all three at the same time, so they can complement each other.
Exactly, yes. So
you get an A for that.
Appreciate that.
Yes, Commissioner Butler.
Thank you. Thanks again. This was super, a really thoughtful and helpful presentation. So you mentioned a couple of reasons why the delay occurred, and one of them was to not rush the outreach process. And so can you just say a little bit more about what you're going to get out of the outreach process by having this delay, and how you all are ensuring that you're not just hearing from the normal folks? So what are we actually getting for this extra delay?
Okay, good question. So I would say that, when I think about engagement, I think about meaningful engagement, and not just, providing a plan, but I really want to get the feedback. And, these plans are pretty lengthy. There's a lot of technical information in them, and we want to make sure that we're providing ample time for folks to actually review it. And be able to provide that feedback. So I would say first and foremost, that's probably going to be the biggest benefit. But also, hearing from the commission as well. If we had moved forward with trying to get this plan done by December, I don't think the commission would necessarily have a good opportunity to really provide the meaningful feedback. And then also, we are continuing to hold attend community events across the state. So it gives us a little bit more time to, get some of the additional feedback from the communities. So I would say that I think those would be the primary benefits.
Other questions? Marlon, can I ask you a process question? Yesterday we heard an awful lot of folks who were here on the ITIP, and freight was a common theme. So how much of the freight forecasting, because freight doesn't know a boundary, it just rolls through. So how does all of this forecasting, and we all know the e-commerce tsunami is here, probably not even peaked, anywhere close to peaking, but how's that process integrated into, say, the ITIP? It seems like that's on a little different schedule. And then particular on this, we're going to have an outline in early December. And will there be enough meat on the bones of the outline to help our partners? Because at least in the freight sector, we have P3s. We don't call them P3s, but we've got an awful lot of partners. Plus, we have all of our AB 617, our disadvantaged communities that often are in the freight, living in the same space. And so how, from an outline to having a draft plan at the end of January, I'm just, and it kind of goes to Commissioner Butler's question too about how does the outreach really get integrated and in the sausage maker, so to speak, of what the final comes up with.
Okay. So to tackle your second question, so while at the commission, we will be, I think we're going to have the complete plan ready. And
before we do outreach?
No. So at the commission meeting in December, we'll have a presentation where we'll basically be introducing the plan. But within the same day or so, the plan will be released publicly.
Okay, but if I'm asking you, let's just, you and me, I'm asking you for your opinion, but I've already written the plan, you're not going to feel real good about that, right? Or I'm not going to feel good, one of us isn't going to feel good.
Yeah.
A bunch of us not going to feel good.
No, I mean, I think...
I'm giving you a draft that you can review, and you can comment. That's what...
Yeah.
Well, no, but the public's going to get an outline, and they can comment till the end of January. Okay. Okay.
Yes.
Well, just
you
get the gist of what I'm saying.
Correct. Okay. And then to answer your first question, you mentioned the ITIP. So basically, we're targeting the 2022 ITIP in regards to the ITSP development. So the work. So we haven't even started the work on the ITSP. It's basically going to start beginning of 2020. And so the work that's being done now on the ITIP, really, I don't think the freight plan is going to have much to really inform that process. Is that what you're asking?
No, I mean, freight was a comment. We had a lot of folks here yesterday.
Yeah.
And the goods movement, Feeding America, the impact of our ag industry on the overall California economy and the ability to move goods was obviously, we heard it over and over and over again. Okay. So I guess that's the gist of my question. So, yes. Others, Commissioner Norton.
I had a question about economic analysis, and especially in some self-help counties like Los Angeles County, the ability to move goods really fuels also our Measure M dollars and our ability through sales tax with Measure M and our ability to house homeless. So there's a lot more at stake than people realize when we want to move forward and have really effective goods movement. I was wondering whether there's been an economic analysis, and I know SCAG has been doing some work on this, and the state has as well, about what are the benefits and what's at stake if we don't have a really robust freight policy, and how we can actually have those investments shown as supporting things that are beyond just freight and goods movement, but actually are doing some social justice and active transportation and other funding based on how we are using sales tax around the state.
Okay. Yeah, I would say, in the freight plan, it certainly is including, or it certainly does include a economic analysis, but I think geared a little bit more towards the freight piece. But I think to your point, we do have an economic advisory committee that we've established as part of the California Transportation Plan, and I'll need to touch base with them to really sort of get at what you're thinking, because I know they're looking at it a little bit more broadly, but I would need to circle back around to answer your specific question.
I think it would be helpful, as Commissioner Butler was talking about, how we're expanding the audiences and really trying to drill down in every audience of concern, including communities that are impacted by freight, to understand where some of the benefits come from good freight movement and the opportunity for clean freight movement in a variety of ways other than just about mobility, that there's a lot of other elements of the benefits that we could realize if we have really a robust freight strategy.
Okay. Well, we'll make sure we get a response back to you on that.
Thank you.
Okay.
Yes, Secretary Kim.
I just wanted to clarify sorry, I just want to clarify that with respect to the freight plan, quite a bit of outreach has already been done, and more is going to be done when the draft is out. So I just want to clarify that a lot has happened and more will happen. Also, since we're talking about plans and ITIP, and I know yesterday there was a hearing on ITIP, I just feel like this is the right moment to address recent developments around Highway 99 and 46. I should have done this earlier, but I think this is the right moment. So I want to make a couple points. With respect to the proposed ITIP for 2020, the projects that were in question, and these are 2 projects on Highway 99 and 1 project on 46, these projects have not started actual construction work yet. All of these are in the early design phase, and to use a baseball analogy, we're in the 2nd inning, maybe 3rd inning, but it's still pretty early. All of these projects are eligible for future funding cycles, and I want to clarify that there is some terminology that's mixed up. The proper term is deprogrammed. These projects were technically deprogrammed, but that is not the same thing as abandonment, cancellation, deletion, elimination, or annihilation. Here's an important fact. If you look at the details of the 2020 ITIP, 20% of that funding is for Highway 99. 24% of that funding is for Highway 46. So you're talking almost half of the ITIP on this corridor, 99 and 46. So this clearly demonstrates a strong commitment to this corridor. We are not backing out. And I want to make very clear to our local partners, because many of them are here, that we are going to work hand in hand with all of you to identify funding sources. That is my commitment to you. Together, we are going to find a way forward. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Secretary Kim. Any other comments, suggestions? Yes, Commissioner Butler.
Yeah, just to kind of round out this conversation that I think me, you, and Hillary have all gone to, and I think, I feel bad. You're up here, you're up here, Marlon, hearing a lot of this, but I think it's something that we're probably speaking to overall, and I think there's some conflation between outreach and engagement, and I think that's what Fran was trying to say. A lot of times when you're doing outreach, you are just going out and saying, here's our plan, and we want you to know what's going to happen, and we want you to know what it is. And maybe there's a few small tweaks. That's very different than engagement. When you're actually able to engage and what you're being presented is that this is what it is. It's more like, here's what we're thinking about, but what haven't we thought about? What else is on your mind? And I feel like both terms are being used interchangeably. And so when I actually agree, with our chair, and that's what I was hearing her say, just like, which of the two are we doing? And in certain situations, some are, one is more appropriate than the other, but just making sure that as we go forward, we can think about how those things are not always interchangeable.
Right. And speaking of listening, I do have one public comment. So I think it's appropriate that I call Esther down now because I do have a request to hear from the public. So Esther.
Thank you.
Shouldn't have stood so far away. Good morning, commissioners. Welcome to Modesto. This is my hometown, so happy to have you all here. So thank you for coming to our county and our city. And welcome to the new commissioners, Commissioner Butler, Commissioner Norton. So encouraged to hear the dialogue that's happened around these plans, not just with the 2 new faces, but with the commission in general. CalWalks, as well as other partners, has been involved in the CTP 2050. We are encouraged with what we've heard, but I agree with a lot of the comments, particularly what Commissioner Van Konynenberg said about something that's actionable, something that doesn't just sit on a shelf. So that's something that we're really pushing for and looking forward to. We are encouraged with the fact that there has been a lot of discussion around equity, a lot of discussion around multimodal transportation. But I think that what we really need to do is figure out a connection to land use so that it doesn't just sit, because there's so many pieces that fit along with this plan. So really encouraged to hear your comments and discussion today. Happy to be back with you all since I missed a few meetings. And thank you so much.
All right. Well, speaking of your hometown, we heard there's a great art exhibit that's up the road.
Oh, yes. I just saw some on my way home the other day. There's a lot of good murals coming up and some really great ones from last year. So hopefully you guys enjoy Modesto and you can come back again next year.
Thank you.
Thanks.
All right. So that was an information item. We are going to move. Is everybody okay? We can keep working for a little while longer. Item 18, please, Terry.
Good morning, Commissioners. You should have received a yellow replacement for this item. Okay. A requirement of Senate Bill 1 is that by 2027, the department fix not less than an additional 500 bridges. The department will present their methodology for determining if the work completed constitutes a fix. Additionally, they will provide us with the baseline number of bridges that had been fixed annually by the department prior to the adoption of SB 1. The department will also provide their recommendation for annual benchmarks. Mike Johnson from the department is here to provide you with that information.
Good morning, Madam Chair, Commissioners, Senator, and Secretary. My name is Mike Johnson. I'm the State Asset Management Engineer. And this item and the next item are both fall under the umbrella of monitoring within the asset management overall plan. So this is really touching upon one of 9 steps that we've been working to put in place over the last several years. And I was kind of encouraged earlier to hear that the commissioners are actually seeing the product of the work on the highway. And ultimately, that's really the ground truth, that things are better. But today we're circling back. If you recall, last meeting I made a presentation on this of what we call the fixed bridge criteria. The language of SB 1 necessitates this because the language calls for the department to fix at a minimum or at least 500 additional bridges. And so the structure of that language required us to establish what was our pre-SB 1 baseline level that we were fixing so that we would know where do we start counting above. And then while it sounds simple to say, well, I fixed a bridge, it's actually quite a bit more technical than that in terms of what constitutes a fix and what doesn't. So for the benefit of the new commissioners, I didn't prepare a PowerPoint because I made one last meeting, but for the benefit of the new commissioners, I will review the 5 criteria that constitute a fix. By far the lion's share of all fixes fall under the umbrella that the measured condition of the bridge is better after a project than it was before. That constitutes a fix. But there were other things that were established back in 2017 when we started counting these fixes that we felt were important to have in there. And those are cases where we address specific vulnerabilities that are related to the seismic safety of a bridge, vulnerabilities associated with the erosion of the foundation under the bridge, what we call scour. In addition, safety improvements that would make the bridge, specifically the bridge rails, more capable to redirect errant vehicles so we don't have vehicles punching through our rails, which usually doesn't end very well. And then lastly, there is a small set of operational improvements that were limiting particular freight movements, low vertical clearance bridges or bridges that don't have adequate load capacity. So those were the 5 criteria that were established back in 2017. This item for you today is actually an action item for the commission to adopt the criteria the department's been utilizing for a couple years now. There were a number of things that came up last meeting, and so I wanted to just sort of run through the punch list that I left with in terms of action items. One was to provide a list of all the bridges, specific bridges that were fixed since the beginning or passage of SB 1. Those lists have been provided to commission staff, and if you wish, Terry can comment on those. In addition, we have what I call the Alvarado list, which was part of a discussion in the last meeting, which we put together for Commissioner Alvarado, and hopefully you received that list pertaining to very small bridges. Additionally, in working with commission staff, they asked us to align the timing along the development of a project that we take credit for a fix. And in the next item that I have, I'm actually going to walk you through the timeline specifically for bridge projects. It'll be very relevant here, but it's a long timetable. And the condition benchmarks that we've been utilizing which are really the next, or part of the next item, have established this point in time in effect where the construction of the work is complete, as the point in time that we can take credit for our projections. We have aligned the fixed bridge definition with that, and as a result of that alignment in time, there is a slight revision which is noted in this book item and also in the benchmark report where that occurred. In addition, there was some discussion in the last meeting about providing a breakdown of the types of fixes. We've done that in this book item and also in the annual benchmark report to specifically to the point of, are we fixing the condition of bridges for the 18-19 fiscal year? 85% of the fixes we're reporting actually improve the condition of bridges. So with that, I would be, one other thing. The commission in the last meeting asked that we provide a year-by-year projection of fixes. And this is a little bit challenging because in some cases, particularly when we get in the outer years of this 10-year performance period, what we expect to be fixing hasn't even broken yet. And so it's a little bit tricky there, and we're crystal balling some, but we have utilized our 10-year project book that we have for the shop, which is one of those other 9 steps of our asset management implementation. And so we've leveraged that and the project level definition of what we're doing for the next 10 years for the shop pieces. And for the non-shop pieces, we've looked at programmatic norms based on expected expenditures in those other programs. So with that, I would be happy to answer any questions on this item.
Yes, Commissioner Gardino.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Michael, it's good to see you again. Thanks for your work and thanks for the update. As I read this book item, a few things jumped out at me, but one of the main items was that we consider a fix to be moving from poor to fair. I have a 14-year-old daughter. If her report card came home and she had gone from poor to fair, she and I would be having a conversation about further fixes to that report card. So help us to understand what all the categories are and why fair would be something that we believe is good enough. And I mention this in the context, as private citizens, not as commissioners, but as private citizens, many of us actively worked to assist the senator and his colleagues to pass SB 1, and then actively worked to fight against Prop 6. And the state of repair of our bridges was often a point that we would turn to as to why we needed SB 1 and needed to block Proposition 6. So could you, again, give us what the range is? I assume it's poor, fair, good, great, outstanding. I thought the Alvarado bridges would be the ones he personally drives on, but you've given it a different
They're fishing
definition.
bridges.
So can you,
yes.
And why in that context would fair be good enough?
It's a great question. Thank you very much for it. Under the federal regulations, all states in the United States inspect bridges using the exact same set of standards. And a typical bridge will have 3 primary ratings for 3 components of the bridge. Those ratings range on a scale from 0 to 9. If on that scale, the actual rating that is assessed by the inspector is between 0 and 4, it's considered poor. If it's a 5 or a 6, it's fair. And if it's above a 6, it's considered good. There's nothing above that. So it's only good, fair, poor. I do want to pause for a minute and just for the public record state that a poor bridge does not mean it's unsafe. And this is very important to clarify. But to get to your question in particular, In most cases in California, bridges are poor because the surface that the vehicles ride on is considered poor. So that's one of 3 overall components of the bridge. So you generally have what you would consider the roadway surface where you ride, and then under federal regulations, the structure that carries all the weight of those vehicles over to columns or to what we call abutments, where those loads come back to the ground. Those are considered superstructure, and then the columns and abutments are substructure. Under federal regulations, if any one of those 3 things is fair, the bridge is fair. If any one of those 3 things is poor, the bridge is poor. So in a number of cases, we're going out and we're fixing poor decks, because that is the cause of about 90% of the poor bridges in California. So we're going out and fixing the decks, but in some cases, another component may be fair. Now, to take that all the way to good, in some cases isn't warranted. And I would maybe give an analogy. If the engine of your car is not starting well, you might go in and have it serviced, and then your car starts well and you're getting from point A to point B. But that didn't necessarily fix the little ding that you had in the side of your body. And so the car, although it runs fine and is perfectly safe, may still be considered in fair overall condition. And that's exactly what's happening with the bridges. Did that answer the question?
Michael, that was quite helpful, and the 0 to 9 scale is one I can relate to. When I was single, I was often judged on that same scale.
Hopefully it was on the higher end for you.
Rarely.
Oh, my. Commissioner Burke.
I know there's been some work on the Vincent Thomas Bridge.
Yes.
And I'd be really interested in knowing what rating it has.
I can get back to you on that.
Okay. But there was work going on, and it was stopped for a while.
Yeah, I think Vincent Thomas is one of those bridges where we have done a lot of seismic retrofitting work, and we're having to go back and now do rehabilitation on some of that seismic retrofitting work. That's one of those that would fall into this fixed category for the seismic portion.
Thank you.
Yes. Senator Bill.
Thank you. When we did the drafting of SB1, this was very important, as you can imagine. It was kind of a centerpiece of SB1, actually, in terms of getting support, because we were able to prove, and when we debated the issue, that we had so many bridges that needed to be done, work had to be done. So it was the conditions reports that we had at the time that were cited many, many times when I visited my colleagues in the legislature to round up the votes that we needed to get the bill passed. So this was very important. We put the performance requirements for the 500 bridges by 2027, and I think the concept that we had at the time, just so you understand, was that we wanted all the bridges to be repaired to a point where the business of repairing the bridges it gave us a little breathing room for several decades, because we're looking at the lifespan, of a bridge. So doing the bridges in a way where we could have several decades of good use and good quality, so we didn't have to go back and continually repair them and retrofit them over and over and over. And we'd have that kind of breathing space, if you want to call it. And one of the reasons we did that is because we knew that the gas tax over time would be reduced, and we put the inflation factor in. We put the inflation factor in VLF. But we knew that over time, as we had more clean vehicles, electric vehicles, that the revenue at some point would start to drop down. And you've always seen those projections, and probably you'll be looking at it when you do your revenue, long-range planning that you just talked about. So I think the idea was to use the money now by 2027 to finish those bridges so you don't have to go back and do them again and spend more money on them later. And that was the concept. I think this report, we should be keeping that in mind in terms of developing a policy on this. And perhaps the staff can come and brief some of the senators on this, because I know they're going to be asking questions about this particular issue. This is going to be very important as a policy. It was a centerpiece of the whole, I'd call it sort of a linchpin of the whole thing, to do the bridges so we didn't have to go back over and over repairing them and doing that kind of work. So thank you.
Commissioner Alvarado.
And thank you for the report. But I think that maybe when we do this, we should, rather than just give us numbers, maybe give us a narrative. Because if it's just a surface improvement, and it brings the whole bridge to fair, but we know that there's scouring or that there's weakening of the structure, then I think we need to know that. So, and there might be a temporary fix. I mean, we might have a bridge falling down, but it absolutely needs an overlay. And so we want to do the overlay, but there's a plan to fix the bridge. We need to know that. And because it's just, when you just throw out a bunch of numbers, and then you've got 5 bridges that are fair, like you said, there's a ding, but there's another one where, you might start that motor, but the whole right front end is caved in. So we kind of want to know where we're at in the case of each bridge. Like the senator said, we just kind of want to make a plan for that. But we also want to give you credit for the work that's being performed. Like, wouldn't consider it an emergency fix, but if it's part of an overall fix, but we can only do a third of it this year and then we're going to move on, we need to know that. So that if you do something on a bridge and it's still actually in poor condition, that we have a plan to bring it up from poor to fair to good.
It's a very good point. And just to maybe put the commission at ease, these decisions are made bridge by bridge by very qualified bridge engineers within Caltrans. And in many cases, we will look at all of the things that are going on. We'll look at the remaining service life of the bridge, life cycle type discussions to come up with what is the most appropriate course of treatment. That may be one treatment in the case of a replacement. It may be a series of treatments. And I think in the backdrop of all of that is really what is kind of the underlying spirit of SB1, which is to be efficient with the use of taxpayers' dollars and to get as many bridges fixed as we can. And I think we are taking that to heart within the department.
And you have to understand our concern. I mean,
Right.
Once a year we bring folks up here, and bridges that should have been fixed in 2013 haven't even started design yet. And we have a parade of folks coming up here and they kind of go, meh. And at some point we said, at what point do we reach where we have to go in and fix them on our own because whatever local agency isn't performing? So that's kind of the reason why we want an overall health report on all of these bridges.
And I just, the next item on your agenda is the actual comprehensive benchmark report. In there, I'm going to spend some time in the presentation talking about the timelines associated with the project delivery process for bridges specifically, and we'll be highlighting some of the challenges that we have getting to some of these long-term fixes in terms of the time frame relative to the passage of SB1 and the 2027 deadline to hit these targets.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, Commissioner Van Kynenberg.
So I want to be very sensitive to what the senator said. So I want to make sure that what we're doing here today is in harmony with what the Senate and the Assembly intent was. And so I'm asking, I guess my question would be is, would it be of value to table this and send this over to Senator Bell's committee to make sure that these 5 points are in harmony with what you guys intended? Because I don't want to make sure, I want to make sure we're like this on it.
Well, we're not going to meet until January, so kind of like.
What's our timeline on having to have this done?
So we're.
Uh,
I don't particularly have a problem with what you're doing today. I just wanted to give you sort of this in more deeper perspective about the subject. You know, you can do what you want as far as I'm concerned, but I think for us, we would like to know more about the bridge thing, because there are people asking questions and they want to know. Okay, I'll tell you what they're worried about, okay? They're worried about, like, you know, we have this thing with PG&E right now, right? So they're kind of worried that there's going to be another natural disaster, and then all of a sudden we're going to have all these problems with all these bridges, okay? So people will start to question, well, are you completing the bridges on the schedule that you said you would when you did the campaign and SB1 and so forth? People want to know. So I think that's the issue. People are concerned. I think the state Senate, I know the members are very concerned about this.
Okay, do you think they want more, like point 2 and 3 is a, fairly broad description. Do they want more specificity than that, or is that sufficient?
I can't answer that.
Okay.
Okay.
You have 5. I mean, that's your.
Okay.
The bottom line is, when are the bridges going to be done? Get the list of bridges. This is criteria.
We're trying to put the definition of what done means.
You should figure out how to expedite them as much as possible. That's.
I'll be Weiner in chief.
Okay. Well, I think we all get the message and clearly appreciate the intent was to show the public incremental improvements immediately within the 10-year span. So I think another challenge might be you're not the only guys with bridges, and the public doesn't really know the difference between whether it's Mike's bridge or somebody else's. So I think maybe, no, some of us don't know. So I think maybe we could expand our discussion a little bit and find out what our partners are doing with the bridge, because the commitment to the public didn't say only fix the Caltrans bridges. It really was, we want to fix all bridges. So I think that might be helpful too, to make sure that we are accomplishing the vision and the commitment that we all made. So with that, do we have any more comments on this item? Terry.
I just want to tee it up for you. So Commissioners, this is an action item. Staff would recommend that the Commission adopt the annual benchmarks that are listed on page 5 of the book item, needed to reach the target of fixing an additional 500 bridges by 2027. Additionally, staff recommends Commission approval of the criteria being used to determine a fixed bridge.
Okay, we had a motion by Commissioner Tavallone. I first heard a second by Commissioner Alvarado. Is there any more discussion? Hearing none, I'll call for the vote. All in favor? Aye. Anybody opposed? Anybody abstaining? That motion carries. Okay, I think we all probably need a bio break. So let's take a quick one. So 10 minutes max, be back at, actually 9 minutes, be back at 11:15.